I want to talk about something very close to my heart. And I've entitled this conversation, Every Man's Elusive Hunt for Happiness. See, I'm convinced that one of the primary reasons that I ended up reaching out to porn, and one of the primary reasons that we find ourselves as men looking to escape to whatever pleasure, to whatever fantasy world, to whatever feeling that we can find through whatever drug or whatever experience, is we are unhappy men in America. That there are men crying out for happiness and for joy. America right now, guys, is the richest country in the world. We all know that. Richest country in the world. Yet there are 15 other countries whose citizens test happier. So somehow I think we're figuring out that money isn't necessarily the answer. In fact, a study came out 2 years ago that said less than 25% of American men are happy with their jobs and happy in their marriage. Can you believe that? That 75% of men are going to work and wishing they had something different. That 75% of men are coming home and saying, man, this marriage is not a good marriage. In America today, right now, more people, let's put up that slide, or as I like to say, or people, more people die from suicide than from homicide. That our biggest gun problem is when a man has a gun and is unhappy with his life. We live in a desperate, broken culture in America, and we don't even realize it. So one of the greatest risk factors for living a completely unhappy life today is being an American. So let's talk about this. Let's talk about what it means to live into happiness. What really is a happy life? Is it actually even possible? First, let's describe what addiction is. Because when we hear that word addiction, we hear this idea of compulsive behavior. Most of us, kind of dismiss ourselves. That I really don't have any addictions, or I really don't have any problems. But here's the definition of addiction, and this is my definition. An addiction is any activity in your life that provides temporary pleasure that results in inevitable personal harm on some level that we feel helpless in stopping. Could be spending, could be food, could be sugar, could be a prescription drug, could be a narcotic, it could be alcohol, could be sex, it could be 100 different things. It could be gambling, but it's anything that all of a sudden we find ourselves escaping into it, and we escape into it so much that it becomes compulsive, and we know somehow in the long run this is not going to be good. It's not going to end well. There are going to be consequences, but we keep doing it. There were a group of scientists that recently gathered a bunch of men and women that had disease ailments that were going to lead to death within 10 years. So all these ailments that were guaranteed to lead to death if they did not change their behavior. So they brought them all in. They said, okay, here's what's going to happen. You are going to die if you keep eating like this, or if you keep living like this, or if you keep engaging in this behavior or this activity. You will die within 10 years. It may be 5, maybe 3, but you will die. You know how many changed? 15%. 85% said, I accept death. I just can't stop what I'm doing. I'm going to keep living the way I want to live. And so many men live in that kind of world. They feel helpless in overcoming their brokenness. And let me tell you where that leads for us as guys. This leads to this this idea that we have in our culture called depression. And all depression is depressing. We're trying to push down our emotions, push down our feelings. We're trying to get through, and we're just walking in this daze and a little bit of hopelessness, and just wondering how we're gonna make it, how we're gonna get there, how we're gonna possibly be happy again. And I can tell you, even though God delivered me from sexual addiction and brokenness, within about a year and a half of my crisis was completely free. And it was a process, and I got stronger and stronger each month, and I began to make more and more progress, and with the help of God, His resurrection, and His good community, I found freedom. But can I tell you what I battled for 5 years, 6 years after that? Unbelievable depression. Unbelievable depression. The residue of living this broken life for nearly 25 years. This still feeling of loss and man, what is the meaning of life, and how can I truly find happiness again? And I can't even fully discover the kind of depression that I fought through. It was the kind of depression, all I knew. Even though I made one attempt to take my life, and it was very early on. It was in the first week of my exposure, my crisis. And it was the reason why they sent me to rehab a day later. But after that, I'd made the decision, I'm not going to take my life. I'm not going to end my life. It is selfish, and it would hurt so many people that love me. And so somehow I'm going to make it. But the only escape that I could find that was legitimate during those 5 years of depression was sleep. It was like I could die for 9 hours. I could die for an hour and come back to life. Like sleep was the only way to get rid of this feeling. It was just to go to sleep. And there were times when I was at work and I would just escape and find a room and just like go to sleep for an hour. I'd get home, I'd go to sleep. I couldn't live with my feelings. I couldn't live with this unhappiness. And guys, I finally got to this place where I said, Lord, I need you to help me. I want to live into joy. I want to live into happiness and figure out how to do this. And I said, I have to believe that Jesus has an answer. So I began to search books, internet, TED Talks, listening to, book authors. I mean, I just looked everywhere trying to find, and I remember finally finding this book in the Bible. And I'd never really read it because it was in the Old Testament. And I just didn't travel very much to the Old Testament. But I found this book called Ecclesiastes. It's an amazing book. Now, the rabbis, when they were canonizing the Old Testament, there were 3 books that they were really unsure about putting into canon. Like, not sure if these 3 should be in the Bible. And one of them was Esther, because there was no mention of God anywhere in the book of Esther, but it told a God story. So they kept it. And then the other one was Song of Solomon. Because if you ever read Song of Solomon, have your wife nearby. It's an erotic book. It's pretty descriptive. And the rabbis weren't quite sure, but they said, okay, we're gonna put that in because it does have a message and it's good. And then the last book was Ecclesiastes, because it was so depressing. It's just this book of a man, a king, lamenting his life in complete and utter hopelessness. And they feared that God's people might, attach themselves to this hopelessness. Look how it starts. This is how the book starts. This is a Bible book. This is a book that is in the canon of Scripture, and it starts like this, Ecclesiastes 1:2. Meaningless, says the teacher. Utterly meaningless, everything is meaningless. Amen. Blessings. Go home. Be well. But I read that and I said, yes. Who is this man? He's talking my language. I so relate to him. And then I kept reading and it got worse. And I was so excited. I was like, yeah, it's worse for me too, man. I got all the way to Ecclesiastes chapter 4, and now he's on the brink at this point. He says, and I declared that the dead who are already died are happier than the living. Did you hear that? You will be happier if you kill yourself. You'll be happier if you die. And then he said, it's better than both, that both he and he who has not yet been had not seen the evil that is done under the sun. In other words, it's better if you just were never born. Depression, right? Meaninglessness. But I was like, this is in Scripture. There's got to be an end to this. I wonder where this is taking me. And I keep moving to the end, and I'm reading about a man that had servants and herds and cattle and a kingdom and wealth and wisdom and wives, plural. I mean, all this stuff. And he finally gets it to the very end, and it's just a quick little verse, and he said, this is what I've come to. This is what I've come to. Remember your Creator in the days of your youth. And that was it. And I remember just closing that book and praying to God and saying, Lord, I'm not young anymore, but I am young compared to eternity. Compared to the hundreds of thousands of years that lie ahead, I'm a young man. And so God, teach me how to cast my memories towards you, because I believe that has to be the answer. What does that look like? And then along came one of the great Canadian philosophers. Being Canadian, I just had so much appreciation for this man's wisdom. And I bring to you his quote this afternoon. I hope everyone could get rich and famous and have everything they ever dreamed of, so they will know it's not the answer. Jim Carrey. And interesting enough, I began to kind of follow Jim Carrey, and he had this same journey, and it ended up in a God place for him as well. And then something else happened not long after that. As I was reconciling with my sons during this period of time, my oldest son had gone through incredible depression as well. So much so that one night at midnight, I got a phone call from his friend. And his friend Josh called me and he said, Blaine, Jeremy just hung up the phone on me. He was drinking beer with 200 Advil, and he said he was going to take his life. And he won't answer, and he won't pick up. And he said, I'm in Tulsa, you're in Dallas where Jeremy is, you have to go find him. So I get in my car with his mom, we run there, get to his house. On the way there, we're almost there. Finally, his phone picks up, but it's not him. It's an ER lady who has loaded him into an ambulance, taking him to a hospital. He is completely in comatose. So they rush him to this hospital in downtown Dallas. We finally get there. We wait in the lobby for hours until finally someone comes out, and they said, he's awake. He hardly knows what's going on, but he is awake. And we went into the room and we wept and we sobbed and we hugged him. Of course, we didn't ask any questions in that moment. But in the weeks to follow, as we moved him into counseling and getting help and trying to figure out what was going on, I realized that my own son was hopelessly unhappy. And it wasn't long after that he sent me a picture. He's a filmmaker, and he was asked by his company that he worked with to go to Africa and to do a documentary film shoot with some African natives who literally lived in the jungle. And so he went and he was shooting this documentary, and he spent 2 weeks with these friends that he calls them now. And when he got home, he said, "Dad, it was the most amazing trip of my life." He said, "I want to send you a picture that I will treasure the rest of my life." And he sent me this picture. That's Jeremy's, the white one. That's my son, yeah. And this is what he said. He said, "Dad, they didn't wear shoes. They didn't have phones. They didn't have video games. They lived in huts. They had to hunt for their food." He said they were the happiest people I've ever met. They loved each other. They served their community. They cared about each other. Parents were highly invested in their children. In fact, the whole village and community was invested in all of the kids. He said it was the most beautiful world that I've ever been to in my life. And he said, "Dad, I've changed everything about what I think will bring me happiness." So he got me thinking even more about what is happiness and where do we find it and how do we discover it. And so all of a sudden, there's this guy that comes along into my world. Somebody sends me a link because they know I'm studying this and researching this, and I hear about this guy that has figured out happiness. And I'm like, really? His name is James Montier. He's an English guy, and he's incredibly wealthy. He's a venture capitalist, but he's also helping other men invest their money to make a lot of money. And he'd been doing that for 10 years, and he'd made several multi-million-dollar businessmen just through investments. And then he got rich in the process because he's getting a part of all this. So he's now a multi-millionaire. And so the story goes that he gets, about 10 or 12 years into this investment stuff and working with these million and billionaires. And he said he finally looked around at all of these men that he was helping get rich and then finding himself rich. And he said, none of us are happy. Some of these guys have killed themselves. Half of them are on drugs. They've been through 3 marriages. And he said, I'm not very happy either. And I thought all of this would bring me everything I ever wanted. And so he took $1 million, went to an Ivy League school in America, and said, I'm giving you $1 million. I want you to research and tell us what is happiness. Universally, in all the world, how do we attain this elusive idea of happiness? Is it even possible? And so they took the $1 million. They did over a year's worth of research, every country in the world, every people group they could find. They gathered all the facts, and they came back together, and they distilled happiness in a human life into 3 containers. 3 cups, if you will, that fill our happiness quotient in life. You want to know what those 3 are? It's absolutely amazing what they came up with. Number 1, cup number 1. 50% of our human happiness is genetic. So there's a potential to fill 50% of our human happiness cup with just simply who we are, how we were born, kind of our personality and our makeup, if you will. And that's beautiful because on some level, God kind of starts us with something. Kind of puts, something there to begin with, a foundation to begin with. But he said, some people, they don't have 50%. There's some that are like the screen shows, some that are Tigger, some that are Eeyore. I mean, there's Tiggers in here. And you appear to be happy all day long, every day, every moment. You just walk in, hey, how's it going? Good to see you, man. It's going to be a great day. And then there's introverts like me who are like, yeah, calm down. It's 8 o'clock. Let me have 4 more cups of coffee. I don't quite have your meter, So we all have, a certain quotient that just kind of is a part of our personality and our human makeup, and that's cool. But we don't get to choose that, that's there. Interesting. Cup number 2. 10%, according to this study, is circumstantial. What does that mean? That means that we are able to acquire a certain amount, 10% of human happiness by changing our circumstances, living in a better neighborhood, having a bigger bank account, getting a better title, having better friends, driving a nicer car. I mean, there's no denying that there are moments of, I feel better because, I have this. It is nice to have a job where you can pay the bills and all of that kind of stuff. But what's amazing, gentlemen, is the 10% cup is what all American men are going after. We believe that 10% circumstantial cup actually is 100%. That if we can just get that, if we can just have more money, if we just have a bigger house, if we just drive that car, if we can just get there, that man, the cup will overflow, we'll finally be happy. And only to find out that there is this expiration date on circumstances. What is it about that you get that car and then like a month later you're like looking for another one? Or you get that job and man, it's an incredible job, and then 5 years later it's like, oh, this isn't good enough. Like there's an expiration date on all this circumstantial joy and happiness. But it's a small part. Here's cup number 3. And cup number 3 is the life-altering cup. Cup number 3 is the life-changing cup. Cup number 3 is intentional, meaningful activity. Intentional, meaningful activity. They began to discover that human beings who went after activity and meaning in their life, that their happiness factor went up 40%. And when they described that, this is how they listed the intentional activity. They broke it down into 4 compartments: faith, family, friendship, and fun. Isn't that interesting? That if you would engage in a meaningful, intentional way with your family, in friendships, in your faith, and then in your fun, that life could change for all of us in a significant way. And I began to think about that. I began to think about what does it mean to really get intentional in my family, in my marriage with my children. What does it mean in my friendships? What does it mean in my faith? What does it mean in fun? I'm convinced that we've lost the good art of fun in America, of enjoyment. We forgot that God set Adam and Eve into a garden, not an institution, not a classroom, but he put us in this beautiful garden with all kinds of things to explore and said, go and take dominion, have a time. Like we've lost the art of enjoying the beauty of our world, and that's why I love the Mountain Men experience, is because it's not only a faith experience, it's not only a brotherhood experience, but we're experiencing the beauty of God at the top of a mountain and looking at the beauty of his creation. I remember climbing that mountain this last year with Pastor Lee, with my son, and with 8 of the closest brothers in my life, and getting to the top of that mountain, not knowing what to expect. And as I summited, tears just uncontrollably began to come down my eyes. I couldn't stop crying. I couldn't let go of my son. I couldn't let go of Lee. There was like this beauty of fun and faith and friendship and family all at once. It had an unbelievable meaning. Never had happiness like that in one moment, I think, in all of my life. So I took this to the Lord. And I thought, Lord, this is just a study. It's just, a bunch of smart people did a bunch of research, came up with what they think the answers are. We can learn something from it, but it's not you. It's not what you said. And I came back to remember your Creator. Remember your Creator. And began to realize, like I'm sure many of you have, that the Creator is Jesus, that he made all things, that he is the all in all, that all things exist by him. And I thought about Jesus, and I thought about what does he have to say about my happiness, about human happiness. And I found out he had nothing to say about happiness. I looked up the word happy in the NIV, the King James, all those translations, and it was not to be found among the words of Jesus. I thought, well, maybe he doesn't talk about happiness. So I thought, I'm just going to read through his first words. I'm going to read his Sermon on the Mount. Because, if Jesus is coming to earth after a few thousand years of God not being physically present on earth, with the exception of burning bushes and commandments on a piece of stone, and Jesus is actually showing up in God form talking to us, I would think that what he had to say in that first sermon would be pretty important, pretty critical. So I thought, I'm going to read it. I'm going to read it closely. So I opened it up, and the first words in the first chapter of that Sermon on the Mount, he begins to declare what we call today the Beatitudes. And this is what he says. He goes on to say things like this: blessed are the poor in spirit, they'll see God. Blessed are those that mourn, they'll be comforted. Blessed are the meek, they'll inherit the earth. Blessed are the merciful, they shall obtain mercy. Blessed are the peacemakers, they'll be called sons of God. All these blesseds, one blessed after another. It's like he's repeating this word again and again. Why? Blessed, 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 blessed. And it's kind of a churchy word. I've never really known what the word blessed means or what it means to be blessed. I just remember getting saved as a 16-year-old Pentecostal kid and going to my Pentecostal church with all these Pentecostal grandmas coming up to me, so excited that a kid my age had got saved, and they were like, "Oh, Brother Blaine, we're so excited you're serving Jesus. Oh, you're blessed. You're a blessed young man. You're blessed going in, you're blessed coming out. You're blessed in the city, you're blessed in the field." I mean, they just kept pronouncing blessings over me. And I thought, well, that's nice, but that is not my language. None of my friends at drug parties were saying, "Man, I'm just so blessed, man." I mean, I didn't know what the word meant. And so I began to look at that word blessed, and I found out it was this really unreligious word. It was the word makarios in the Greek. And makarios was a word that the Greeks used to describe the ecstasy of the gods. And so when they would worship the sun god and this god and that god, they believed that all of these gods had makarios, that they had this ecstasy that was unattainable by human power, that only the gods could carry Makarios. And then along comes Jesus, and he grabs that word out of that vocabulary, and he declares it, and he says, I have come to tell you Makarios to those that are poor in spirit. Makarios to those that are merciful. Makarios to those that seek to make peace and shalom in the world. Makarios to those that endure persecution and that stay in the fight no matter how bad it gets. He said, I've come to pronounce the ecstasy that you've always looked for in God is available to you. But he said it's not in a car, and it's not in a piece of paper that's green, and it's not in a title, and it's not in grabbing and seizing power, that it's giving your life away, that it's showing mercy to someone who doesn't deserve it, that it's bringing peace when you'd rather divide and be hateful because they're not on your side, that it's enduring tribulation with patience when you want to fight back and you want to take the shot, but you don't. He said, if you will dare to live into the beauty of this Jesus life, that you can begin to experience Makarios, God's kind of joy. I'll close with this. The great theologian William Barclay put it like this: Makarios describes that joy which is secret within itself, that joy which is serene and untouchable and self-contained, that joy which is completely independent of all the chances and all the changes of life. Human happiness is something which life may give and which life may destroy. But Christian blessedness is completely untouchable and unassailable. Gentlemen, when I got a hold of that, I tell you the truth, I began to pursue intentional, meaningful blessedness every day of my life. I said, Lord, I'm going to figure out how to live into this. I'm going to figure out how to give my life away. And I'll never forget sitting in my office contemplating this revelation and this truth. And I invited Jesus into the room. I said, Jesus, come into this room. I desperately want to live into this Makarios joy, into this unassailable ecstasy of God. And I don't want to pursue the things of the world to find it anymore. I don't want another car. I don't need another title. I don't need to write another book. I don't need another speaking engagement. God, I just need you. And I need to live this out. And I pray you'd show me how. Please show me how to live this out, because I don't want to die an unhappy man. Friends, you may or may not believe this, but I'm telling you the truth. Jesus walked into the room. And when I say that, I'm sure it was a vision of some kind, or, physically, I'm sure he wasn't actually there, but I felt like he was. But he walked into the room, and I literally saw him. And he walked over to where I was seated, and I thought he was going to pull me up and give me a hug or whatever. And he kneeled at my feet. And in my mind's eye, as I closed my eyes, I saw him take a bin of water and a towel, and he began to wash my feet. And I began to weep. And then he just looked up at me with these beautiful eyes. And he didn't have to say a word. I knew exactly what he was saying to me. And he walked out of the room. And I knew he was saying, Blaine, you are one of my followers. You are one of my disciples. You're loved. You're accepted. And then I knew this, that I knew my job the rest of my life, as long as I lived, was one thing: to get up from that seat, to walk out the door to my wife, to my children, to my brothers, to every person I would meet on this planet, and do one thing: wash feet. To give my life away. To stop thinking about how I can be happy and my needs can be met, and begin living a life that says, how can I serve you and how can I love you? And I can tell you, gentlemen, that in living that life, I've never experienced the joy that I live into today. We'll have bad days. We'll have tough moments. We'll have to endure persecution, tribulation, distress, and suffering. But we can do so with this bliss, this ecstasy of God, if we just keep remembering it's not about us. It's about giving our lives away to those that God brings into our life. Bow your head with me. Lord, this principle, this truth set me free. I've never been the same since I began to live into it. And Lord, I love it. It is so beautiful to be unselfish in relationships and to think about what's best for the other and not me. What an amazing life that is to live. And I fail so many times, but I just keep getting up and working it again and again until I get it right. And I pray, God, that these kind of men would walk out of this place, that I have to believe that this culture, this American unhappy culture, is waiting for men like this to wash their feet, to serve them, to care for them, and to see men in absolute joy doing this work of the gospel. That Jesus, you showed us how to live this life, this gospel, Jesus following life. That a part of it was picking up our cross, dying to ourselves, dying to our own ego, dying to our own wants and our own desires, and realizing that in losing our life, we truly do find it. And so, Lord, we say, take our lives. Let us walk into the room. Let us walk into every room, not thinking, I'm here, but rather walk into every room thinking, who needs me? Who needs me in this room? How can I serve this room? I want to open up this altar. I'm going to walk off it stage here, but if you feel like you just need to give something to God today, as we close out our time together, you feel like there's something missing in your life, you feel like there's a broken part, an addictive part, a compulsive part, you feel like, man, I've been selfish with my wife, I've been selfish with my children, I've been putting everything else first except the kingdom of God. I've been chasing stuff and things and money, and I'm quitting the chase. I'm quitting the chase. I am pursuing from this moment on loving God and loving others. This altar is open. And if you want to come pray, if you want to just come say some words with God, come and do so right now as we close with some worship. Come and give your life fully to Jesus. Let's stand to our feet.